It's time for Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. The NATO meeting is currently underway in Spain with the leaders of the 30-member countries, including the U.S., Canada, and Germany. Now, they're there to coordinate defensive strategy, discuss new policies, as well as boost the alliance's response to security threats. And for the very first time, President Yoon Suk-yeol is taking part in the meeting as an observer. President Yoon's attendance signals NATO's concerns over China's growing global influence, as China has refused to condemn Russia for the war in Ukraine. And also, eyes have been on that trilateral meeting between South Korea, the U.S., and Japan, which was the first such meeting since September of 2017. For more on those meetings and what this might mean for South Korea, we connect with James Kim, Senior Research Fellow at Asan Institute for Policy Studies, and Ms. Elisabeth Braw, Senior Fellow of Foreign and Defense Policy at the American Enterprise Institute. Thanks for joining us today, guys.
Thank you.
All right. Now, President Yoon Suk-yeol attended the NATO summit in Madrid, becoming the first ever South Korean leader to do so. So how would you evaluate his first multilateral diplomatic engagement? James.
Thank you. I think overall, President Yoon looks very strong coming out of the gates for the start of his term. First, he had the summit with President Biden in May. And now this meeting in Madrid. First, it sends a very strong signal to the world that South Korea is a proud liberal democracy willing to engage on matters of global significance and also work to strengthen trans-Pacific and transatlantic relations. He's also scored up some points, being able to be the lead sales figure for South Korean nuclear defense and technology industries by winning some contracts. And promoting these industries. And finally, President Yoon is putting to rest some of the criticisms at home about his ability to handle the rigors of his new job as president and do his best to address concerns related to North Korea and rising uncertainties in Ukraine and Northeast Asia. So overall, to me, it looks like a very promising start indeed.
Well, Elisabeth, then, what's your evaluation of his diplomacy in Madrid so far?
Well, I think what's really interesting about this summit is that it's clearly a NATO summit, meaning 30 countries in Europe and North America. But what's so interesting is that leaders like President Yoon have been invited to participate and are participating quite energetically. And never before in recent memory has it been so obvious to the world which countries are friends, even though they may have differences amongst themselves, and which countries are not friends. And never in recent memory has it been so important to have friends, which is why it was very interesting and significant that President Biden met with both the leaders of Japan and South Korea together, and also that they are part of this whole NATO summit. And what's really, of course, the big issue for NATO is the rise of China as a strategic rival and the need to have to develop the already very close relationships and links with countries like South Korea.
All right, James, so then with NATO's new strategic concept, what changes do you expect in the transatlantic allies' military posture?
Well, the NATO strategic concept is often updated roughly every 8 to 10 years. Given that the last one was announced in 2010, this most recent announcement is quite timely. It coincides with the rise of new systemic challenges posed by China and Russia, as Elizabeth mentioned. And according to this particular concept that was announced, NATO's focus squarely is on strengthening deterrence and defense posture in Eastern Europe, but doubling NATO's military footprint and increasing readiness across the Baltic and Black Sea. We're likely to see, based on the readouts we're getting from different countries, including the U.S., more forward deployed force posture to enhance rotational deployment for all air, sea, and ground forces in the Baltic region. And this is not just by the U.S., but also by the allies. The allies are also likely to increase their defense spending, as some have already begun to do. We've also seen the announcement on Finland and Sweden's accession. So there is a broadening of the NATO alliance. and partners, including like South Korea, are likely to play an increased role. For instance, Seoul has also committed to establishing a diplomatic mission to NATO in Brussels.
All right, now going along with that, James, then how do you expect South Korea to obviously cooperate with the alliance?
So ahead of this trip, National Security Advisor Kim Jong-han stated that President Yoon will seek to establish what he calls a comprehensive security network through this meeting. And I think what he means by this is a focus not only on the military aspect of the relationship, but also the economic and human security. It would probably include a concept of a national security that is more encompassing, that includes technology, supply chain resilience, climate change, healthcare, and even human rights. So expect more coordination with partners in both Europe and Indo-Pacific region, and this coordination and cooperation will be broader and deeper.
All right, on another note, Elisabeth, now we heard that Finland and Sweden's bids to join NATO were initially blocked by Turkey, but just yesterday, the Turkish government lifted its objection to the two countries' applications, paving the way for both to join the alliance. Tell us more about this.
Yes, it was going to be a fantastic success story. Sweden and Finland joining or being invited to join NATO at the Madrid summit. That was the expectation this spring or in May when the countries announced they wanted to join NATO. Then along came Turkey and blew the whole thing, of course, by saying, well, we are uneasy. We, Turkey, are uneasy about their, Sweden in particular, Sweden's support of the Kurds. And so we are not going to agree to Sweden and Finland joining NATO. So until yesterday, it looked like Sweden and Finland would not be able to receive their invitation at this summit. And then came the surprise announcement that the three countries had reached an agreement. And it seems that it was a solid piece of diplomacy that was conducted by the three countries and the Secretary General, and with some assistance by the United States, where Sweden and Finland agreed to suspend their support of certain Kurdish groups related to the PKK. And this was a big deal for Sweden. For domestic political reasons, Sweden had been supporting one group in particular that was a red flag for Turkey. But now the parliament has gone into recess for the summer, and then there are elections. So that freed the government up to strike a deal with Turkey.
All right, then. Following the meetings in Madrid, obviously, James, do you think we could expect a growing rift between U.S. allies and China and Russia?
I think it's important for us to understand that this meeting is less a setup for rise in tension between U.S. and its allies on one side and China and Russia on the other. Rather, I think it's more of a response, or even it may not even be related to some extent. I mean, it is in some ways responding to the growing threat and uncertainties emanating from what the leadership in Beijing and Moscow are doing when it comes to Ukraine, Hong Kong, Xinjiang, Taiwan, and elsewhere around the world. So I think it's important for us to understand that it is not NATO instigating this. It's actually what China and Russia is doing. Secondly, South Korea is not new to this scene. In fact, Seoul has been cooperating with NATO since 2005 as one of its strategic partners to promote things like capacity building, fighting maritime piracy, encouraging non-proliferation, and also fighting terrorism. So if there's any narrative that suggests that South Korea is escalating tensions as one of U.S. allies with China and Russia by attending this meeting, nothing can be further from the truth.
All right. Now, South Korea did become the first Asian nation to join NATO's cyber defense body. Elisabeth, what input do you think South Korea could provide to the new security initiative?
South Korea is highly developed when it comes to cyber defense, and of course, an obvious reason for that is that North Korea has extremely sophisticated cyber aggressors. They often target countries other than South Korea, developing countries. North Korean hackers attack on the Bank of Bangladesh is the stuff of legend, and let's hope it's not repeated in that magnitude ever again. But as a result of partly of North Korea using cyber so successful to gain cash for its nuclear weapons program, partially for that reason, but also for reasons of its own domestic security. With regards to other threat actors, South Korea has developed really good cyber defense capabilities, and that's something that every country is trying to do at the moment. And this comes back to, I think, the importance of having friends. NATO and the 4 countries it invited from the Asia-Pacific region. This is a very solid group of friends, and they can share best practices, they can exchange expertise, they can also share threat updates in a more organized or a more formal fashion. So all of this really helps everybody involved, because at the moment we need all the friends we can get, and the friends all benefit from sharing that knowledge, expertise, and so forth.
And of course, many eyes were on that trilateral summit between Seoul, the United States, and Tokyo. Tell us more about what came out of this meeting, James.
Yeah, this was the first trilateral meeting in 5 years among these 3 countries. President Yoon stressed the need for U.S., Japan, and Korea to address a common threat in the region, which is obviously North Korea. And it's really good to start off with that sort of common denominator where all 3 leaders can agree on something. And they agreed on the importance of upping readiness and increasing joint exercises. President Yoon and Prime Minister Kishida in particular discussed ways to move forward and address the pending issues between Korea and Japan as soon as possible. So overall, I'm carefully optimistic that this could, I mean, we might be turning a corner here in Korea-Japan relations, and we can look forward to more positive developments on this front, obviously after Japan's upcoming upper guide elections in July. So I think we're going to have to wait till that election is over for us to see any sort of push for closer relations between Tokyo and Seoul.
All right. Well, Elisabeth, what was your reaction to that trilateral summit that we saw for the first time in 5 years?
It's interesting that it took place in Madrid at a NATO summit. Who would have thought that such a meeting would take place at a NATO summit? But this really demonstrates how important national security has become, and that national security is not bound by geography and as much as it used to be. So NATO summits, even though they theoretically should only concern the territorial integrity of European countries, have become sort of a gathering point or gathering opportunity for like-minded countries to discuss not just the territorial integrity of Europe, but the national security or international security concerns they share. And we should remember that in NATO's new strategic concept, China is mentioned as a strategic rival, in particular things like economic coercion. Well, that's something, that's a concern that South Korea shares with Europe and other NATO member states, that it shares with Japan. And so I think this is the beginning of a new trend almost, where NATO summits will become the opportunities, the best opportunities for the world's, the liberal or Western world's leaders to get together, whether they belong to the formal alliance of NATO or not.
And Elisabeth, I mean, President Yoon did encounter, well, now very briefly, with the Japanese Prime Minister on the sidelines of the summit, the NATO summit. What are your expectations on the future of Korea-Japan relations on that front?
I would be looking very strongly at how they try to further develop trade. What is becoming obvious to all liberal democracies is that China is an uncertain market, because it can, it does choose to retaliate against other countries' governments by targeting those countries' companies operating in China. We have seen it happen to Taiwan, Lithuania, Sweden, Norway, other countries. And so that makes China a very uncertain business environment for companies today. A huge market, and also a huge manufacturing operation for many companies from liberal democracies. But with this amount of risk, and 95% of companies surveyed in a recent insurance report were concerned about the political risk of doing business in China. So it's really important for Western governments to get together and try to enhance trade amongst themselves, to make up for any loss that might result as companies decide that China is no longer safe enough to operate in, or not to operate, maybe not at the same extent that they've been doing until now. So I think we'll see a shift to friendly countries.
All right, a lot to look forward to on that front, I guess. That's all the time we have for now. Again, that was James Kim, Senior Research Fellow at Asan Institute for Policy Studies, and Ms. Elisabeth Braw, Senior Fellow of Foreign and Defense Policy at the American Enterprise Institute, with their insights. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.